Okay, welcome back everyone, and I hope you had an enjoyable break, an opportunity to go deeper onto some of the questions and ideas that have been shared so far this morning. I particularly found it quite compelling that in the presentation by Andrew Parkin and the conversation with Senator Dasko, how fundamentally aligned the lack of trust and the lack of a sense of well-being in this economy are correlated. This is fundamental to our work, I would say, and I think in bridging from that presentation to the next, it's something to hold on to. Just before introducing our next speaker, I'd like to let you know that there are microphones at the top of halfway up, 2/3 of the way up the stairs on either side of the room. And for those of you who are online, you can pose questions in the chat, which we'll be collecting and presenting after the presentation and after we have an in-person discussant. There will be an opportunity for question and for Q&A and discussion. Alors, on va commencer avec une présentation de Dr. Victoria Hurth. She is a fellow of the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. She is a boundary-spanning pracademic who works at the intersection of governance, leadership, and trust building for transformation towards well-being for all. She co-led the 5-year effort to establish the international ISO standard for governance of organizations. She has advised numerous global corporations, sits on the board of the Organic Standards Company, the Soil Association Certification Limited, and she will be speaking to us about bringing the economy we need to life, a roadmap for transformative leadership. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Victoria Hurth.
Thank you. Welcome everybody to my session. First of all, and I'm sure this will happen at numerous times, but I wonder if we could give another round of applause to the organizers of this amazing event. You know, I know how much goes on. You know, the advisory board, the people behind, you know, as we all know, it takes a lot of work. So I just wanted to thank them for making me feel so welcome to be part of the team, so to speak. My session, as Stephen has already summarized, bringing the economy we need to life, a roadmap for transformative leadership. So we obviously have very aptly an eagle here, and I put this slide up to help you to step out of whatever sort of worlds that you come from, in a way, to take the assumptions about how things are and just put them lightly to one side so that we can get ourselves into that sort of bird's eye view, I suppose, to sort of see the wood for the trees, as we say. I think you have a different way of saying it in different countries. I've spent probably 35 years since I was a young person realizing, A, what well-being was, having had a wonderful childhood, and really deeply knowing and being grateful for what it was that I knew was so wonderful about my life. And then hitting conversations from adults that essentially were showing me that the decisions that we were making were misaligned with that well-being. And people telling me that what I should do is, you know, go and get study this. And when I would say, but why? It's so you can get lots of money, but why? So you can get a big car. And I'm like, really? This is the advice from adults in the world around me. And I'm like, some things are wrong here. Now, I'm 47, so that was a long time ago. That was when I was end of primary school, really. And the rest of my life was spent trying to understand that, to understand what it was to have a good life, to understand what decisions would make that come about, and to understand why and how the decisions we were making were misaligned. Now, I'm not going to go through my life story, but what I will say is that I had no idea just how bad the decisions that we were making were. I had no idea that in my lifetime, I would be right at the heart of a generation and a privileged part of that generation that was making those decisions and replicating those decisions that could mean the absolute end of humanity's ability to have any well-being on this planet forever, which is where we are now. It took me until 6 years ago to have a fully formed view of the fundamentals. By that, I mean, I had to go through the haze, both in academia, through working at international, national, and local levels, different sectors, being in conversations, leading conversations, but all the while distilling, synthesizing. Yeah, but what does that mean? How's that different to that? But what's going on here? My PhD was about opening as many interdisciplinary boxes as I could to try to find answers. And it was confusing and it was foggy. And I didn't know if I would find anything that seemed like a useful answer to me. And I certainly wasn't going to spend, although I was always trying to make impact happen, I was very clear I didn't want to make the world a worse place. I did that when I worked for Accenture. And I said, never again am I going to wake up. I'll just stay in bed. Yeah. And so about 6 years ago, I got through the fog. And I'd like to leave that with you as an analogy. I think it's so easy to be in the fog. And as the chaos of the system that we've created exacerbates, that fog gets thicker. And if I'm useful for anything in this world, it's to be in service to pass to you and others like you globally the results of that 30-odd year inquiry, because we do not have time for everyone to go on that journey. And so I ask you also, connect with me on LinkedIn, give me feedback. When I have these forums, they matter, because I have the opportunity to take each one of you on some kind of a paradigm shift. You might already be there, but for many, that's what it is. And my job is to do that as well as possible. So any feedback you can give me, I'd be very grateful. So some key takeaways. So I'm going to give you what I'm going to say first. And I've read the books on how, I can't say I'm very good at it, but I've read the books. So it's complex, very complex. The world is complex and humans make it complicated. That's a really not a nice combination, but it's true. But some things we know. And we really do need to get behind efforts, and I'll explain what those efforts are, to clarify what it is that we do know. Because what's complicated is finding solutions to the problems we have. But if we have no governance frame of reference for what it is that we're trying to seek problems for, how will we ever know if that is better than that? We can't. So we need to get through that complexity. Secondly, is the economy stupid? It really is. And we'll go through that. Economy is our problem. It's a construct, it's a philosophy, we've created it, it's killing us, we need to change it. How we do it. Not the goal of the economy, that's purpose-driven, that's brilliant. But how we enact it is totally and utterly off course. But it's also governance stupid. And that's the second key thing that I want to leave you with. If the conversations and all the actions that I'm sure all of you are doing are not grounded in, and does this change or make sure that the governance which routinizes decision-making is doing what it needs to do, then it's just nice ideas. A lot of energy is put into things that do not end up having teeth and having legs. And we need things to have teeth and legs. So that's the second thing. And then the bottom line. We are great humans in a stupid system. Stupid system we built, but let's face it, for the majority of us here, we've just been plonked on planet Earth, and this is the system we've got, right? Our first biggest challenge is to name the issues with the system. Give it a name. Say, look, that thing there, that's killing us. We need to redesign it, and it needs to look like this. Then we can use all of our energy to make that happen. Until then, the status quo will win. And what we need to make happen is to transform governance so that it achieves a well-being economy. We can also call that, I'm going to use the word well-being economy, and you'll see why throughout, but we could call it a purpose economy, a regenerative economy, and that is my key point. It doesn't matter what we call it, sausage economy. It doesn't matter. What matters is the substance of that, and pinning down and clarifying what that is. But anyway, a well-being economy made real because economy is just an idea. It has to be operationalized, and it's operationalized in organizations. So purpose, made real by purpose-driven organizations, and driven by meaningful work and lives, because we are the energy source. That's it. It starts and ends with our energy. And if we don't do that, we will lose the market economy just when we need the market economy the absolute most. And so to distill that, and then the rest of the presentation, I'm going to avoid going into too much of the detail of this. I'm going to say it in broad terms and I'll return to it at the end of the presentation. So this is the existing unsustainable market economy. We can give it a name and it looks like that. And the reason that it is unsustainable is one base, I mean, there are lots of assumptions that make it not work, but there is one base assumption that is literally at the heart of all the problems. And that is that we assume that financial income is a near perfect proxy for well-being outcomes. So we don't need to worry about the well-being, because as long as we count the financial income and we believe that the market does its thing, then we don't need to. We don't even need to worry. We're so sure it works. So that's the nature of the problem. So what we have, therefore, is a GDP economy. We count the financial income at the national level. We have profit-driven organizations, and that's not just business, who count the beans. And and I'll unpack that a lot more. And we have financially driven work and lives, and I'll unpack that a lot more as well. But what is the sustainable market economy? We have enough wisdom to be able to give this a name and to say and to describe what it looks like. And that's the exciting cusp that we're on now. It's a well-being economy, or other of those names, made real at the meso level by purpose-driven organizations, and fundamentally driven by the energy of meaningful work and lives. What I'm going to be focusing on in today's presentation is the whole system, but it's particularly that middle bit, that meso bit. Because as you can probably see, an economy is a nice idea until you operationalize it through organizations and their decision-making. And you cannot have meaningful work and lives if the organizations that we operate with and in our daily lives are not purpose-driven. So purpose-driven organizations unleash meaningful work and lives, and they enable and make real the well-being economy. So that's the bit that we're going to get right into the detail of, because that's where hope lies. And this is a really important point. So maybe 15 years ago, when I was presenting this to executives, I present and work with all kinds of leaders at all kinds of levels. And it would often be a little bit like, oh, that's really idealistic. It's a nice idea, but you know, the business is business. And by the way, I will always be talking about all organizations, of which business is a subset within this organization. And I'm like, how do I express this in a way that they understand that this is an opportunity? Because so now I have this. The alternative, we will not have a market economy with its democratizing freedom and efficiency effects if we do not transform that market economy to not be killing us, and actually to be working for us and working for its actual own goals, which I will talk about as well. So if we want a non-market alternative, and there are lots of people that talk about that now, and I'm not discounting the fact that maybe we've gone past that in many ways. Maybe we're already past it, and we just, just think what happened in the pandemic. How quick and easy was it for us to give up our rights to government when things got tough? Now, that's just a tiny, I don't know if you've seen that wave diagram, with climate change and biodiversity losses, the massive waves, and COVID, just this little precursor. It won't take much for us to give over our rights and lose democracy. It won't. And we will lose, therefore, the market economy, because one of those other key things is that democracy and a market economy are very, very interconnected. Very interconnected things. So, and most people that say down with the capitalism, they mean the form of capitalism, the one on the left. They don't mean the market economy. You're like, yeah, down with capitalism, so you don't want the freedom to be able to exchange things and move things around. No, no, definitely want that, but we don't, you know, and again, that's what we'll be unpicking today. So, some foundational thinking points. So half of me is an academic. Defining terms is important for all of us. That's not an academic pursuit. We all need to be academics. So let's break down some of these fundamentals that without this, we can't really have a conversation about the economy, and we can't have a conversation about what it needs to look like. So the economy fundamentally is about allocating the resources available to society in a way that maximizes social well-being. Now, that's been said in various ways over the centuries. Even now, with the current business as usual system, if you open an economic textbook, the first paragraph will say something like that, and then it moves on. So that is an implicit fact that we need to remember. So what is well-being then? If well-being is the point of an economy, that is. So when we say something is, you know, let's talk about economic terms, it's like, that doesn't mean money. The economy doesn't mean money. The economy means the production of well-being for everyone via a system that includes financial capital. So we can think of well-being as a positive state of being where current and future needs are met such that there is the capacity and opportunity to flourish. Now, that's a hybrid from different disciplines, but we have to remember that well-being is just an umbrella term for the good life, for flourishing, for eudaimonia, for essentially the most eternal question that all philosophy, all spiritual leaders have been asking. A question that should be at the very heart of our societies, but which, as I will cover, has become something that we let the market decide now. If we don't bring that question back into the room and keep that the live discussion, then we will lose it. And that's where we're standing now. So then let's look at sustainable development. So we know that well-being is about current and future needs. And then we look at the definition of sustainable development in the Brundtland Report, which popularized the concept. It was international leaders coming together for the first time to do that. And it's the most widely used definition. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs, in other words, well-being, of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And it took me about 25 years for the penny to drop to think, hang a minute, they're all saying the same thing. Long-term well-being for all. It's not just about any old thing, it's about a thing called well-being, which we will never have an answer to because it's subjective, but is the main question. It's not just for some people, it's for everyone. You can never have a shared ethic unless it's for everyone. Impossible. So equity has to be at the heart of any shared ethic. And it's not just for now, but it's for into the future. We don't just want it like today or tomorrow, and where does that stop? This is about well-being over time. And it really matters to move from words like sustainability or like the economy to this very clear anchored statement, long-term well-being for all, or enduring collective flourishing. I mean, it doesn't matter what adjectives you use there, but the point is that it is the thing that matters. And if you ask enough whys, and that's the final most important thing, it is the closest that we'll get to humanity's meta-purpose. So we can think of it as a meta-purpose. And if there's another one out there that I haven't caught, presenting this to audiences asking that same question, please do tell me. Because one of the things I want to say here as a challenge to all of us is, if not this, what? And we need to be really clear what that what is, and then we need to get on with making it happen. So that matters, because if we say long-term well-being for all, we can use that as an outcome that we can judge, we can debate, we can weigh off different strategies and opportunities and possibilities. We can start to dig into complexity because we have a frame of reference of what we're really trying to work with, and we can have accountability against it. And that is probably one of the most fundamental points. We cannot drive change towards something we have not clarified what it is. We cannot measure whether we're getting there. We can't measure how far away we are from it. We just know we have a collapsing world, right? But we cannot move forward strategically together. So, and if we were in any doubt about this well-being thing, I mean, it's everywhere once you start really tapping into it. But let's just look at the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board. that has the audacity to just in print, just say, the primary function of governments and other public sector entities is to provide services that enhance or maintain the well-being of citizens and other eligible residents, of which the economy is a tool of government, and we as citizens, the ultimate governing body, delegate to government to do that and to organize the economy in a way that maximizes our well-being. And I would love to know what the case is in Canada. I don't know. I just know that in the UK, and this is a little known fact as well, but I presented this to the directors of the economy recently in the UK, and I was doing some research, and then I realized it was kind of staring me in the face, but local authorities in the UK are incorporated. They are companies, they have directors, and their mandates, and they have ultimate power to get away any other rules or laws that stand in their way of providing well-being. Now, a bit unfortunately, they break this down into the pillars of economic, social and environmental, which I don't think are helpful. We need to remember pillars support something. The thing they're supporting is long-term well-being for all. That's the bit that we need to notice. Otherwise, we just get back into our siloed way of thinking, and we forget that the economy is the thing that transforms environmental and social resources into something for that. So just don't think it's helpful. So the interesting fact in everything that I've just said is that the point of the economy should have been delivering sustainability, which tells us something immediately, because it tells us that we wouldn't even need a word called sustainability if we didn't have unsustainability. In other words, if the economy, in other words, the governments, in other words, us as citizens, had actually been producing and sustaining the long-term well-being for all that we were supposed to be. And yet, here we find ourselves in 2024, where, and on the right-hand side is a NASA diagram of temperature anomalies over time. And you can see how they go from being relatively stable to unstable. On the left-hand side was an interim report from the IPCC, an excerpt from that from a couple of years ago now, which is helpful because it talks about the very strong consensus of actual realities that we and our children and our loved ones are likely to live in, depending on when you're born and what time scale that you go out. And it's important for us to reflect on those fundamental realities. So we can see this temperature anomaly going through the roof. And I'm going to present to you now a few of these data points, you might say, because another thing I would say to all of you is, if you make decisions, any decisions, and this sort of data is not in the room when we make those decisions, then those decisions will be off course. This is our operating environment. This is our strategic context. And this is what is driving nearly everything that we sort of see then that happens on the surface. So that's climate change. We know that that is going to have tangible realities on the bits that we currently count in the economy. Italy is predicted to lose up to 60% of land value just by 2100. And these, of course, are not priced into assets at the moment. That's an injustice that's waiting to unfold. I'm sure you've all seen the injustices of development on floodplains, unsuspecting people buying those houses, nothing being done to consider the impacts on them, for example. We also know that in the 5 years since the Paris Agreement, fossil fuel funding has gone up, not down. And therefore, it is no surprise that despite all the nice plans and ideas and hard work, we end up in a situation where emissions are still rising. And the climate system cares nothing for our nice, but this is how we operate. It's like, oh, hang on a minute, but it's going to take time, So just hold off while we sort our stuff out. I mean, and I'm going to explain in this presentation why we operate. We're clever people, and yet somehow we think that this system's going to wait for us to catch up. And it really matters that we think beyond climate, though. It's very easy to say sustainability, ergo climate, ergo net zero, and that is not the reality. I found it helpful to distill it into energy terms, because that's what really, energy is what sits at the heart of all of this. There are issues that are about the energy that we burn In other words, fossil fuels. Geopolitical instability, air pollution, ocean acidification, climate change. These are all issues that if we go clean energy tomorrow, yes, there's a lag in the system, but we could get there. But what have we not solved if we go net zero tomorrow? Any ideas? Just throw them out. What will we not have solved if we are completely clean energy, like now? Air pollution, sorry, say it again. Equity, sorry, it's an accent thing, sorry. Equity, thank you. We would not have solved equity. What else? Particulate matter in the oceans, yeah, or particulate matter that comes not from exhaust pipes, but from tires, for example. Anything else? Biodiversity loss, thank you. And over here? Yeah, well-being for everybody, absolutely. And then one layer down below that, because climate change only matters because it has an impact on long-term well-being for all. And that all can be human and non-human life. And that's where you reach the pinnacle of ethical discussion. Non-human life as intrinsic value in and of itself versus non-human life as a means to human or non-human life. And we'll go through that again as well. Anyway, so yes, there are a whole heap of problems that are to do with how we use the energy. And that's a much harder thing to tackle. So we're tackling climate change because somehow we can leverage it into our system. We can count it, we can trade it. How beautiful, right? We're still struggling with that. But on these other things, which actually get to the very heart of our way of life, even that climate change does that, but even more so when it comes to how we use that energy. And so we just think, so we have all these things in the cupboard, all of these issues now collapsing around us because we've reached endgame time, and we're saying, well, we'll let you out because we think we can deal with you. But they're coming out, whether we like it or not, and that's where we are. And some of those, what it matters is because some of those solutions to climate change and the fuel we burn, some of them solve the other side of the story, but some of them make them worse. And we don't have the luxury of time. We had some luxury of time. We've totally squandered that. So now we have no time. We have to deliver everything at once. And there are positive aspects to that because constraints are the mother of innovation, as we will focus on. So yeah, we have to avoid climate myopia or carbon tunnel thinking, as some call it. But it's also a social crisis, as we know. So this is the stark, horrific fact that nearly 70% of the world's population own only 3% of the wealth, and less than 1% own 41% of wealth. That's obviously rough estimation. And all of us here, I can imagine for sure, are probably in the 0 point something. The top, not less than the top 3%, I'd say, of the world's wealthy. And then you add in education and privilege. And that's another thing that we need to really own. This is a global problem. But those who are in a position to do something really about it and enable those that aren't to do something about it, that's us. And if it isn't us all out, then there isn't someone else. And of course, this is now intersecting, and we're seeing the breakdown, and trust obviously just sits there in amongst trust being, and I say, what do we mean by trust? Well, it's got to be trust to do something, for someone to do something, right? So we can trust that someone's going to always be late, right? We can trust that someone's always going to muck things up, or you know, because they're consistent, right? But that's not what we mean when we talk about trust in the context we talk about it here. We talk about trust in terms of fundamentally, do we trust that you have my best interest at heart? And if we look at the data through that lens, then we can start to understand, well, whose best interest has been at heart? And so going below averages to be able to say, well, these people trust the system because they're doing quite well out of it, and those don't. And that's where the conversation has been going, which has been very interesting. So we know that the richest 10% are responsible with their discretionary choices for a large majority, really, of the impacts that happen. And that is going to come to bear. We also know that just take mental health. And we know loneliness is the biggest pandemic. Let's just touch on another interconnected factor of mental health. Up to 5% of GDP in Sweden, for example, is spent on cleaning up mental health. And how much of that is created because of the organizational decision-making that we have around us? We also know then we have to touch on ecological collapse. So humans and our animals as a percentage, 10,000 years ago, 0.1% humans and their animals. Now, it looks like this, 96%. And their animals, as you can see very visibly here, that bit really matters. That bit really matters. And Cambridge University, no meat at Cambridge University now, by the way, for students. It was voted in, and many other universities, actually. And this is what the consequence looks like. We are in, by all assessments, for the last 20 years, scientists have been saying, yeah, we're pretty sure we're in the sixth biggest mass extinction, and the last one was the dinosaurs, in statistical terms. And we have to turn that curve, and there's obviously global work being done and progress being done on that, but we are still way, way off if we continue on business as usual, which we are. And anyone know what this is? Anyone want to take a guess? Pardon? Pollinating, yeah, hand pollinating in China because of the decline in insects. You probably heard of insect apocalypse. About 75% of flying insects recorded as declining in Germany, for example, but that story is everywhere, and it's also in North America where this is a reality. And you can see how the business model might stack up if you're in a very low pay wage environment, but it's not going to last for long. So if the objective of the economy is long-term well-being for all, the goal of the economy is actually sustainability, and yet this is where we are and what's happened, what's unfolded is at exactly the same time that the market economy has expanded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. If you go back and read papers from the sort of 50s, they're like, oh my God, you know, the market's getting so huge. We never thought there would be this many companies of this size in the world. So this is very new. Where we are today is very, very, very new. And under that watch and in that system, it's no coincidence that we have ended up where we are. So where did we go so wrong? What does the wisdom of everyone working in this field for such a long time, what is it that I have distilled over 35 years about what has gone wrong and how we can fix it? So firstly, to ground some key terms again, we need to talk about decision making, because any impact that we get in the world is a result of our decisions. End of story, really. That's it, yeah? You make a decision, something happens, therefore energy is exerted in a direction and stuff happens. So what matters, however, more than anything, are decisions that are taken routinely, yeah? Ones that are just like auto-taken. And those that are taken automatically within large organizations where lots of people are doing those routine things, that's where you start to get into the real nub of things. So I'm going to describe here decision-making, culture, and governance, and why this is where we need to focus our attention. So organizations are merely individual decision-making units, i.e. you and me, coming together to make decisions as a unit, yeah? Otherwise, you'd just stay as individuals, wouldn't you? So you come together so that you can create an organization, so that you can do more, because it's like you're one organism making a collective decision, yeah? Decisions. So a personal group of peoples that has its own functions, responsibilities, authorities, and relationships to achieve its objectives, right? Culture, we say strategy, culture eats strategy for breakfast. What is culture? Well, it's routine decision-making. It's essentially our worldviews, so what we think is valuable to pursue in the world, and usually that's implicit, and how we implicitly think the world works, or our stance for action, that is manifested in decisions in a real-world context, and over time, you come to act in ways that optimize the outcomes your worldviews, your values are trying to pursue, and that gets embedded, made real in what you can call cultural hardware, systems, processes, anything tangible that locks in ways of doing things, and cultural software, ways of perceiving, showing up in conversations, acting, moving your hands, you know, these are the intangible, routine ways of doing things that we've come to feel work to pursue our fundamental, what we think is valuable, our worldviews. And that gets locked in over time. And so it becomes the way that things are done. Lots of things influence culture, but if you're in an organization, which are the things that matter, because they routinize collective decision-making, the thing that really influences that is governance. Governance is the discipline that is there to structure routinized decision-making in organizations. Now, I'll return to this in a second, but the definition, and we only had this in 2020 since 2021, before that it was just paragraphs about governance in stock exchange codes in the main. Human-based system by which an organization is directed, overseen, and held accountable for achieving its defined purpose. Now, the reason we have that is because over a 5-year period, I had the privilege of leading the process to create the world's first norm, standard, consensus on what is governance of organizations. Any organization, including government as an organization, in any part of the world. There were 77 countries and 25 liaison groups, including many of the UN bodies, OECD, and others, involved in creating that standard, and it was signed off by 164 countries. It has purpose as the primary principle, and it has sustainability locked in a few key ways. I can tell you that that is a standard that matters for the world, that most people don't know about it yet, but it is the thing that we need to fall back on to say there is consensus on this most fundamental of topic. And the reason why that also matters is because governance, which is, you know, whenever anything goes wrong, people always will say, oh, well, it's the governance. And that is because it is governance, right? But yeah, we don't even know what it is. And worse than that, whilst it goes back to Plato, the growing up of the discipline of governance has happened within a time and an economic system that is essentially the one that's killing us. So the view of governance that we do have is anchored to a system that is about protecting financial assets for shareholders and investors. Yeah. And I take that as a clap for ISO and all of the people that put the work in to do that across the world, because it is, honestly, that standard really, really, really matters. And there's a story to this, and I'll be returning to that. And I really like that headline, by the way, of the Wall Street Journal. International standard setter wades into corporate governance debate. and really, that's what it is. So here's the definition again. We're just going to break that down. So yes, for its defined purpose, and we'll return to that in spades, but these 3 key functions: direction, oversight, and accountability. So you can't have governance. Governance does these 3 things, right? That's what it does. Direction is the core, because you then oversee your direction. Are we achieving our direction or not? And then you're accountable to significant others for whether or not you have done that and what you've done to correct that. So you can't do oversight and accountability unless you are clear what you're oversighting and accountable for. And that's direction. And that gets to the heart of governance and decision-making, because direction, and this is the basis of any decision. So this could be when you wake up in the morning and you decide, I want a cup of tea. It could be anything like, I decide I'm going to cross my leg now in a different direction, right? It doesn't matter. It could be also the objective of the largest company in the world, or the direction of the government of the United Kingdom, right? But there is an overarching optimizing objective to something that happens, right? And that's based on your fundamental worldviews and your stance for action in the world. But any goal, be it making a cup of tea or being the largest corporation in the world and doing what you exist for, will happen within parameters. You can call these limitations, guardrails, boundaries, but the point is that they are things that constrain or are boundary lines for what you're trying to achieve. So, in your heads, please think about all kinds of parameters that might be. Does anyone want to shout any out? What are parameters? Financial. Yeah, so how much money you have or not? Yeah, absolutely. What else? Time? Brilliant one. And we're running out of it. Sorry? So rules, in other words. Yeah, and we can go from there to the law. But the parameter in an organization is not the law or those rules. The parameter is that you decide to encode in your decision-making adhering to that. And that's where we're going to get to now. So we say parameters because these are decision-making parameters. The reality might be that there's the law, but the decision-making parameters in an organization is we obey the law. And the Dieselgate people didn't get that message, huh? Because they turned around and said, yeah, but we thought you wanted us to maximize profits. Huh? You wanted us to obey the law as well? You didn't tell us that, you know? Seriously, that's what they said. So what are the parameters? Pardon? Do you have a kettle? Yes. Do you have the right infrastructure? What was the other one? Geographic scope. So, okay, we need to break that down a little bit. But do you mean your ability to physically move to certain places? Okay, so but we need to break that down to say what's stopping you or not, and how is that like a conscious, but I get your point, absolutely. So, but the point is, and that's the really, really significant thing is, you're trying to optimize for something, you're trying to do something as big and quick and as well as you can, and you know that there are certain things you need to respect as parameters to do that, yeah? That's the basis of any human organizing and any way of operating so that we don't go off course, right? And why that also really matters is because we use this word strategy all the time. But strategy means nothing unless you know your optimizing objective and your parameters. Because strategy is merely, how do I achieve my objective within parameters? That's it, given the dynamic context I face. And then you might have 3 or 4 choices, and then you decide. And that's your strategy, to achieve your objective within your parameters. So these are foundations that are very little understood by those making decisions. And one of the things that this unsustainable world does, if nothing else, is force us to have much better run organizations that are much clearer about these fundamental points, right? So now we get to the actual main part of the presentation. So you know why this presentation was, oh my God, is that the time? Right. How long do I have, actually? Right. This is the problem, you see, when I'm told I have a period of time and then, okay. So I hope that I've set you up to be able to get what I'm saying next in that time frame. And that if you don't, it doesn't matter because it is encoded in so many videos and documents and standards, and that's the exciting thing that I'm going to end on. So I'm going to center this around a triangle. This was Herman Daly's triangle, the foremost ecological economist, so you might say the first or the major well-known person of a discipline of economics that actually asks the questions that we're all asking here. And Donella Meadows also relied on this triangle, and it has here been further adapted. But I did speak to Herman Daly, bless him, just before he died. He didn't tell me he was that ill. I was bombarding him with all these emails, but he said that he was happy that this work was happening to bridge the macro into this meso level. So we have here financial capital, we have the objective, and we have parameters. And the issue we have with our business as usual system, and this is the economy that's killing us, is that we have an objective that says to organizations, focus on your own self-interest, and most specifically, your financial self-interest. And in terms of parameters, the most important parameter that you have are the stocks and flows of financial capital. And they're 2 different things. And we only really know they're 2 different things when we unpick what I just told you before, yeah? And that's why we get confused. Because we say, yeah, but profits are important. I'm like, profits as an optimizing goal that grounds your innovation strategy, or profits as a hygiene factor to make sure you have enough of them so that you can do what you need to do. Pay your bills, meet the expectation of stakeholders, including shareholders, and invest in your purpose. That's what we need money for. And all organizations need this financial capital. Governments, charities, anyone, any organization needs an excess of financial capital. And please don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. And by separating and trying to pretend that we have these very different types of organizations, it's one of the things that we need to overcome. Now, the problem with having the goal and the parameters there is, of course, that's where the strategy sits, and therefore the business case. And that's why I call it a logic. Because we cannot expect an organization who's been told by society the best thing you can do is focus on making as much money as possible for yourself, or on surviving for yourself, like universities, and and then say to them, you've got to care about other things. It's like, well, our whole governance system is set up to optimize for this within these parameters. So we can try, but it all feels a little bit like philanthropy on the side, really, because it is. It's a sideshow. So that means that the ultimate objective of the economy is outside of the core innovation agenda of any of these organizations. And for businesses, even more so. Because we don't just say, don't focus on long-term well-being. We don't just say, don't worry about it. We say you're not allowed to focus on it. Because the market economy is supposed to work because individuals who are well-being optimizing make decisions in the marketplace based on their own idea of their own well-being. And if companies who we now are promoting to work in their self-interest, just like we assume customers are, if they start trying to engage in the topic of well-being, then the risk is that they'll manipulate that for their own ends. And so we say off limits, arm's length. You are there to read revealed preferences and deliver on that demand. And you're not there to do anything else than that. And it also means, because all our legislation, all our legal focus is saying, focus on counting the stocks and flows of money. We don't ask companies or organizations to count the stocks and flows of their natural, human, and social and intellectual capitals. We don't ask them to understand their impacts on the social and environmental systems that they fundamentally rely on, and we all do, and we don't ask them to understand the health of their stakeholders. It's a nice to have. And in the last 10 years, with the integrated reporting and other things, we've tried to bring that that sort of stocks and flows of non-financial capital in. And of course, we have the ESG agenda, which I'm going to very briefly talk about. So there are some fundamental assumptions, as I was touching on there, that mean that we do this. And we all, hook, line, and sinker, believe it. We just think, yes, yes, the market is a well-being machine. And if we all play our little role, well-being will pop out at the end. And we're so sure about that, we're not going to govern. We're not going to govern. So that's where, you've got the triangle here. Government is also counting the GDP as the optimizing goal. No idea whether well-being is being optimized or whether the market's actually producing goods and services that are making us less happy and reducing our well-being, or whether or not in the process of producing this thing that's not really making us happy, we're destroying the very basis of all of our long-term well-being for all in the process. And we as citizens are not asking that question. We're not delegating to our governments to do it. The governments are not asking the companies to do it. And we're all resting our whole lives on these ridiculous sets of assumptions. The companies will obey the law, and that's how society makes any issues with the system known, and they go into law, and then that creates parameters for decision making, and everything's fine. And anyway, only customers know what's best, and they know that advertising doesn't really work. They know what their own well-being is, and they can see through that, and. False, false, false. And we know it's false, and no one would say that these are true, and that's the irony. No one would say it. And the most toxic assumption that financial incomes therefore equal well-being outcomes. The Harvard Impact Weighted Accounts team, haven't got time to go into it, but basically they quantify the asset stripping that's been happening. Because if you ask organizations to focus on their self-interest and not to bother to count the stocks and flows or health of anything else that they rely on, then you are going to liquidize those assets, the climate, society, human endeavor. You're going to asset strip it, and that's what we do. We liquidize it into financial capital, which is the bit that we're focused on, and then we celebrate it as success. And this team is just exposing, even on environmental terms, companies that say they're profitable are not profitable. Not even on their own terms, right? And that's just one part of the story. So what's been happening in the last 20 years is a move to logic 2. And like I said, there are papers that unpick all of this, but it really matters because this is a diagnosis tool for you and your stakeholders to understand where you are and what we can expect. If you're in logic 1, don't expect much more than that. You've got to change the governance to move yourself or your stakeholders or the government into a different governance logic where different decisions are made, where a different business case can be made. Otherwise, we're never going to get anywhere. We'll just get the same results. So what's been happening is, especially after the financial crisis, was there was a shift to saying, well, yeah, no, we believe how the market economy works and, you know, maximizing well-being for individuals and profit maximizing is the best way to do it and everything. But we should be focusing on the long term. Because there's no reason, there's nothing in the diktat of business as usual economics that says you have to focus on the short term. It's just a consequence of the system, right? And so therefore, we should focus on the long term. Now, why that matters is, if you're in the middle of the triangle and the issues of unsustainability, and let's face it, if you run a system in the middle of the triangle for 70, 80 years and you supercharge it, you're going to have an unsustainable world, right? That's where we are. If that unsustainable world hits you in the bum, right, which it is, stakeholder pressure, legislative changes, not raw material prices through the roof, the only way you can respond is if you can create a business case that your short-term self-interest will be enhanced if you invest in doing something different. So you get CSR, a smorgasbord of activities that are just placating stakeholders. Let's go up the ESG ranking, that's environmental, social, and governance factors. Let's go up that ranking because investors will give us a better deal. Oh, let's put a volunteering program in because our employees are not happy. But it doesn't make any sense other than the business case of that logic. When you move to logic 2, however, you extend those parameters because you actually want to make long-term self-interest optimized. And to do that, you suddenly have to say, well, who might we need in the longer term? Oh, those suppliers that we crash and burn and just go and get another one. What happens if next year there isn't another one? Or what happens if they're not there to support us? Or what about our employees? Are they actually happy? Hang on a minute, our attrition rate's this. Shouldn't we be worried about that if we want to be around for the longer term? And so what you do in governance term is you change the parameters so you enable a business case that will divert short-term interest investment in order to put it into longer-term investment. And that's where you get an actual rationale for dealing with climate change, for dealing with social justice or equity. And if you're trying to influence a company that is not in this logic and they're in the middle of the triangle, well, you know, just be realistic, really. You might get an individual that can see something different, but they are locked into the governance decision-making of their system. So, and the really important point here is that even if you are truly enlightened, so this is enlightened self-interest, and most are not. Mostly we have organizations who are a bit enlightened around climate change and maybe have got a target there, right? Let alone all these other issues that are just equally as urgent. So, but we still have long-term well-being for all off-limits. We're relying on this well-being machine of the market to do that. And that leads to 2 key issues. It means, well, more than 2, but let's just say 2. You do not have the energy source to deal with the inertia that is in this system. Because nearly all business models are asset stripping the bottom of the triangle. To get within those parameters of a healthy system, to change that business model, requires massive, massive transformation. Most people are like, well, I'm getting my paycheck in a minute, I'm retiring, I'm out of here. So you have to care to go through that level of effort and take that level of risk. And that is exactly what's required. But the other thing is, we need innovation to be focused on the right problems. Our organizations and business is society's innovation nerve center. We endow organizations with the right to take our precious shared resources in order to transform them from well-being. If the best that we can do, and this is the ESG agenda, environmental, social, and governance, investing, and data gathering thing, it's saying, have the resources, but make sure you're not harming them, and tell us that if you're not harming them. At the moment where we need supercharged innovation, we have the mother of all issues, we need all of our organizations and our most enterprising ones to be 100% focused on solving these problems, and we're saying, yeah, use our resources to make as much money as possible for yourself, just don't harm them, which already in itself is a massive ask. And then we're asking somehow that they'll have the motivation and the creativity to make this happen. It's not going to happen. So this is a vital step. And it's part of being a purpose-driven organization, but it isn't the whole thing. And so I mentioned about ESG. This is something I'm not going to go into, but it is, and I broke down the terms, but it is still jargonistic, but it's absolutely the key thing that is changing the world of business around us at the moment, but it's hitting the middle of the triangle. So you have Europe, who is essentially trying to say, be purpose-driven, care about your impacts, and it's hitting middle of the triangle organizations, and they're wondering why there's all the pushback. Whereas in America, firmly middle of the triangle, logic one, no bones about it, and its legislation around this is saying, disclose matters in terms of how they affect your financial situation. Forget about everything else. So I'm not, and it's a messy thing, and lots of stuff is happening. Right, so I've just had my 50 minutes. I should have 10 minutes. Yeah, thank you, I do. Brilliant. Okay, that is good. That's exciting. Time, the most fundamental parameter. Huh? So again, I'm not going to go into this, but there will be, especially the senators in the room, you know, this matters because this operating within thresholds of healthy social and environmental systems is now hitting law. And the largest companies in Europe from this year are having to disclose against that, whether or not they are harming these systems, so to speak. And it's not just for their own operations, it's for their whole supply chain. And in not long, if you are, and if you are doing business over a certain amount in the EU, you need to be involved with that anyway. But most organizations are somewhere in the supply chain. Canada, you'll be pleased to know, is definitely going more towards the European route than the American route. So I've got something to show you there on that. Again, not for this one, but I talk about the ESG endgame, because ultimately, if you're a decision maker, you've got to see where this is going, and you've got to try and make legislation go faster and more comprehensively. We need all of the issues, climate change, social inequality, breakdown of trust, we need it all on the table to reinvent our business models. We can't do it one after other after another. We will drown organizations in bureaucracy. But if you look, the taxonomy, which is a clever word for just saying, what do we really mean by sustainability, is hitting through finance. And finance, therefore, goes off and affects everything else in the world. So what it's saying is, you have to declare, in Europe, they're saying, you have to declare if your portfolio is sustainable or not. And by that, we mean this. And even if you don't do anything in sustainability, you just got to declare a zero. And the idea being that this will reverberate through the system. But what I wanted to emphasize was this foundational parameter thing. It's because what you have to do to say an investment is sustainable, you have to say you are net positive. I'm not going to open that can of worms and go into that in one of the things. But everything else, and this is the important thing, you have to do no significant harm. Now that is a bomb dropped in the room. Again, we can talk about, it depends what we want to pick up in the conversations, but it is, watch out for that word, do no significant harm, and it's in the Canadian taxonomy that you have as well, but it's not in the US, because that is a different mindset to, how are you harming your investors' short-term financial interests? That's the question at the heart of the ISSB and IFRS, which are the names, well, the IFRS is the organization in the US that's trying to act globally to create voluntary standards that are brought into legislation. Anyway, that's enough on that. You can look back at it. So I hope now you can start to, I hope I've led you to water so that now it's pretty clear what purpose is. Because purpose is a shift in your governance system that changes the objective of your organization. It recognizes that profits are never a terminal end goal because they're symbolic, because they mean nothing. Profit is money. Money means nothing. It means what we want it to mean. It is a means to an end, and it can only ever be a means to an end. As I think John Kay, the famous economist, said, profits are like, he was the financier, profits are like blood. We need it to exist, but the point of living is not, is like breathing. We need to breathe to exist, but the point of living is not breathing, right? It's the same for profits. We've just forgotten, because in our crazy set of assumptions, we decided to tell our most important innovating organizations that their goal is to make as much money as possible for a third party. Incredible. So, and things are starting to change. And so the context for purpose, which I'll get to in a second, are that the law is not enough. Like, organizations realize that playing this game in the middle, even the bottom of the triangle, you're going to have to go further. So this is a Peruvian farmer that took RWE, a large German energy company, to court in Germany because they thought that would be the best place to be heard, to say that the emissions that they've created have caused the Peruvian farmers' crops to decline and that they're due compensation. It went through a very long period, but is being heard. I don't think it's been resolved, but it's still in process. But the judge said, in deciding to hear the case, that people who act according to the law must be held responsible for the damages they cause. In other words, the law is not enough. And that's why when you look at litigation, it is anchoring against human rights, the most fundamental of the basis of law, because this is about long-term well-being for all. And so it will get very quickly to the point that if you can show that something is against long-term well-being for all, you have a case. You have a case. And then let's look at some of these key terms, right, that are key to our economic system. A fiduciary. What is a fiduciary? Someone who acts in someone else's best interest. We just decided to add the word financial in there, right? How long until we take that word financial out again? Why is it in there? The doctrine of utmost good faith, really critical for the financial and for any other sets of decision makers. You must act honestly and not mislead, or withhold critical information, and then that leads us to materiality in accounting terms, which means you cannot withhold information that's important for the decision making of another, as a company, as an investor, or whatever. We've just added the word for their financial decisions. Take that word out, and everything changes, and it won't be long. And we have now. And I'll mention the book that we're writing on this topic now at the moment to distill all of this. But there are book after book of a book now saying, hang a minute, this is the problem, guys. This is the problem. This is the problem. The problem is that often those only speak to small, partial parts of the system, but we need a whole system-wide thing. So this is purpose, basically driving an organization that exists. And I will now say the definition that is in the British Standard in Purpose: an organization that exists to optimize a strategic contribution to long-term well-being for all. So it's an organization that has decided the most important thing that it can do as a strategic contribution to long-term well-being for all, and that's why it exists. Because no organization can solve everything. And we often see purpose statements saying, yeah, we're here to make everyone's lives better forever. I'm like, that's the meta purpose, right? Brilliant, right? That's like stage one. But that doesn't help your decision makers to know what to do or not to do. It's not strategically scoped. The question is, what bit are you doing? Because someone else is doing that. And in the marketplace of well-being, what is the thing that you are best placed to do? But there is no point trying to achieve the meta-purpose of long-term well-being for all, in other words, the goal of the economy, by the way, and that's why purpose creates efficient, effective economies, because it achieves the goal without all this fluff in the nonsense in the middle, is there's no point to achieve that goal if you are destroying the basis of that goal in the first place, right? And you see this a lot, even with charities. You know, we're here to help this group of people advance in this way, so we're here to help homeless people in this quarter of Vancouver, but all the resources that are brought to bear to help them are essentially destroying the long-term well-being of those homeless people because they are based on supply chains that are undermining climatic systems and biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. So making sure that when you are purpose-driven, you have a business model that can operate within the healthy thresholds is utterly critical, while recognizing almost no business can do that at this moment in time. That's why we need hyper-creativity, hyper-innovation, and more than anything, system intervention. Because as soon as you become purpose-driven, you realize, hang on a minute, if I'm going to optimize my contribution to long-term well-being for all, well, if this person just made a different decision, I'd be able to do that so much better. So maybe I should try and influence them. Or actually, we all could do with that. Should we all get together and lobby government for a change in X? And so automatically you become systems thinking, and you become, and because you care, what my neuroscientists on the neuroscience of purpose says, the give a shit bit, you know, you care. So you do, yeah, the give a shit principle, you care. And so you will do things, and this is then the other thing that purpose brings in. Not just technically aligning ourselves with a sustainable future, reducing the tensions, making the economy efficient and effective, but we unleash the energy to do that. Energy that we have literally been turning away at the door and say, go away. And that's the energy that it is to be a human, which is to be fundamentally driven by serving the good of another. That's what makes us human. And we know that that is true, but we have denied it, and we've told ourselves we're self-interested, and then we say, yeah, but we can't do that because we're self-interested, but we are. Anyway, in the purposes of moving forward, you therefore change the business case, but of course you need to make enough money to do all of this, so financial and profits don't become unimportant, but they are a means to an end. It's profitability, not profit maximization. This is the British Standard in Purpose-Driven Organization. It was published a year or so ago now. I was the technical author for that. I helped the experts, and myself as one of them, to encode the consensus. That went out for global vote and will now be turned into, over the course of the next 2 years, starting in September, an international standard in purpose-driven organizations. One that encodes the answer to the question, what do the governance behaviors of an organization that is driving long-term well-being for all and not destroying it in the process, what does that look like? Now, we have not had that clarity ever before, but you can see that once we're clear on the destination, we can then gap analysis where we are in relation to it. How far? Is that bit of legislation actually stopping that governance behavior, or is it enabling it? So it's encoding the trutopia of the future that we want to create, that we all know to be true, but we can ground it. And if we don't do that, we will never achieve it. The status quo will always win. So I don't see any other route than encoding in global consensus what good looks like, and then using it to wield the change that we need. So if any of you are doing work in this space, this is a tool for you. And it's a catalyst for all of us to take the opportunity or not, to build the global movement around something very tangible in the next 2 years. So please join your national member body. Canada is signed up. It will be part of that process. There'll be work to actually, you know, bring your opinion within the working group, but there's a lot of work to bring the nation behind and to help Canada to lead the rest of the world to get involved. Because there are a lot of developing countries that would like to be involved, who use different language for this, but they absolutely are embodying purpose-driven organizations or want to, but who can't afford, for example, to engage. So there's a lot of work to be done. So purpose unleashes humanity, I've said that. I want to just very briefly mention that the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is real. There is a nascent version in Canada that's been very supportive of this, the We Can movement. And then, of course, and we're going to hear about that in the panel discussion later, we have the Canadian Purpose Economy Project, which is really working to build this at the grassroots level and beyond. And there's fantastic, we'll talk about that in a minute, but fantastic work happening in Canada. There's stuff happening in the legal sense that's moving us, and there's a senator, Julie, who's here, who's going to be moderating our panel, who's part of trying to really help Canada to move forward. Let's not pretend that the law changes we're talking about will get us all the way there, but they get us some way there. And maybe we can talk about that in the Q&A, because I think knowing what it's doing and not doing is important. This is the ISO standard, get involved. And then this is what you can do now. What's your current reality? What are your realistic ambitions? What logics are your stakeholders are in? Be realistic, but ambitious. Make sure all your discussions are around governance and not just floating as nice ideas. And how can you support the ISO in Canada? In closing, I just have 3 key slides. I'm not going to say this again, but this is our choice. We've created that system. Do we want to create the one in the middle, or do we want to go somewhere else? Because that is the choice on the table. That's the book. We're trying to encode it. I haven't written anything yet, and I'm feeling a little bit anxious. I've got to put the manuscript in January, but there's a LinkedIn. Please, connect on LinkedIn, and there's a group that you can join. And the wonderful Sparks Publishing, who are working on our promotions, Canadian homegrown organization who are brilliant. And we made a special magazine about the wellbeing economy that the Canadian Purpose Economy Project's in, and there'll be hard copies available. So please do take advantage of that. They're also a sponsor of this forum. And then finally, one quote. And this is from a famous economist, Keynes. And at the time where Victoria, as a harbour and everything that was going on here was really coming to life, was when Keynes was born. So he was born into the beginning of this business as usual system that's killing us. And he said, there's no reason why we should not feel free ourselves to be bold, to be open, to experiment, to take action, to try the possibility of things. Over against us, standing in the path, there is nothing but a few old gentlemen tightly buttoned up in their frock coats who only need to be treated with a little friendly disrespect and bowled over like ninepins. I'm not talking about any of the senators here, obviously. Oh, and at the end, because you'll get the slides, there are just links and things that you can look at. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so very much, Victoria. And please take a seat. I would like to welcome Ilse Treurnicht to the stage. Ilse is known to many of us. Her career spans science, health, clean tech firms, innovation ecosystems, venture capital, and public policy. She's an impact investor with TwinRiver Capital and North-South Ventures, chair of the Public Policy Forum, and served as CEO of Mars Discovery District. Over to you, Ilse and Victoria. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Victoria. That was a tour de force across a large and complex landscape, so you've energized us all. But, and I know we don't have a lot of time, one of the things that really strikes me about your conversation, which is feels to me at least, a bit different from the purpose economy conversation in Canada, is that you really center the market economy. It's almost like business must save us. Or in saving itself, business must save us. And you've presented this material to business leaders across the world. Why that emphasis, and how is this message received by those business leaders?
Okay, so before I answer precisely that question, I do have to say that when I say it's the economy stupid, it's because the economy is not just business. We are all in the economy. Everything is the economy. And the way that we understand the economy and the role of business is the vortex that everything else comes into. So we think about universities, and we think how in order to pursue their social license to operate, what do? Well, they focus on creating graduates that can go and do jobs. That allow them to have more money to spend in the marketplace, so it's the financial. So we're all part of this economic system. This market economy is our system. So that's the first thing to say. And that what unites organizations is way, 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 way greater than what separates. I mean, what do we even mean by profit, for profit and not for profit? I mean, like what? Everyone needs profit. What we mean is profit maximization. What we really mean is the ability to take financial capital and strip it out of the organization and give it to someone else. That's what we mean. But we don't talk about it in those terms. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing then to your question is, yes, I have presented this to some of the boards of the biggest banks in the world, to cross-sections globally of executives from CEOs to every level, and persistently over many years. There has only been one occasion from a French luxury brand where somebody has turned around, and I always give the opportunity, I'm like, if not this, what? Where someone has turned around and said, actually, I think profit maximizing is the best way to achieve well-being, which is the assumption that we all live with. And I was very happy that he had the guts to say that, but all his team then went on him and said, no, it's not. So I would say that we all know this. We all know it's true, and business leaders know it's true. The issue is that they are locked into a system that doesn't allow them to act differently, because the governance of the governance is middle of the triangle. But in an inert system where we're all locked in at multiple levels, because wherever you are, you could be the prime minister, you could be the CEO of the largest company, or just anybody. You could be purpose-driven, but the system around you is damn likely not to be. That's what we have in terms of the lock-in, right? So in an inert system, the only way you change a system is to have this energy within you to try to unlock the system around you. And that's the purpose-driven energy. So for business leaders, I see them saying, genuinely, we're drowning in bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is created from plugging the holes in a system that's killing us. That bureaucracy is going to get worse. They feel disempowered often from being able to change the system around them. They're beholden to shareholders. Often they're beholden because they think they're beholden. So it's not often the law, often it's the interpretation of the law, but that norm is powerful. And so I would say in every business leader, there's a purpose-driven business leader waiting to get out. The question is, can we help them to do that?
And so it's hard not to, your match between the power of the market economy, broadly defined, plus governance, it's hard not to ask the question, what does this mean for corporate boards, corporate and other boards, for the whole machinery of governance, the guidance to audit committees, governance committees, how we recruit board members?
Yeah, it's massive. I'd say that's really where the rubber hits the road because of the nature of governance. Now, a governance system is the whole governance system, right? So you wear governance hats and management hats no matter where you are in that system. But the governing body is very special because it has ultimate accountability for everything that the organization does. So we can think of an organization as essentially being the governing body that then delegates, and it can choose to delegate nothing or everything. And if you're an organization of one, you will be the whole governing body and the whole executive, right? So it really hits there. We have we've created, this middle of the triangle is so beautifully comfortable because we've just pretended that none of the complexity of the world exists, yeah? It's lovely. And because we all tell each other that, we can just, it can be so, like the emperor's new clothes, right? So boards have been set up to do protection of financial investment and maximizing of financial investment for third parties, yeah? Even, I mean, I love the cooperative movement, and a lot of those values are great, but you're still anchored to the self-interest of those members. So you're depending on those members to be aligned with that. So what we really need to do is to become, all of us, governance literate, and that includes us as the ultimate governing body. We are all members of the ultimate governing body, and that's citizens, right? And that's even in a dictatorship. Ultimately, you have the power, you are allowing that government to do that. So we need to become governance literate. We need to understand ISO 37000, what governance is. And then we need to ask some very hard questions about everything about how we set up boards. Because at the moment, we set up boards in ways that fulfill that duty that we talked about, but they also are set up, they are set up to, they have very limited time to take massive decisions. They often are led by the executive, and I mean, I don't have time to go into all of the problems that we have with the current governance system, but the risk is that great people that could be on governing bodies are leaving because the legal risks are getting so high, the bureaucracy is getting so big, and they're not fit for purpose. So we either end up with no one doing governing, you know, in terms of corporate boards, or only those people who are literally willing to put their life on the line to do it because they care or because they're going to get a lot of money. So we need an overhaul of governance. And I think government needs to lead that question. Because who else will, all collectives? What are you all thinking? Who should lead that?
I'm not sure government is really the power of that, but you know, the entrenched interest in the governance machinery, the broad-based governance machinery, I think is one of the impediments. And so that brings me to the ISO standards. I mean, as somebody who studies innovation, I've always thought of standards as a bit of an innovation laggard indicator, right? You know, it comes after people have agreed and they're now in the market and they figure out how to police behavior and make sure everybody plays fair. You see standards as a tool of the revolution, as an item of you know, to spur innovation, unlock innovation. Why that? Why now? And how can we maximize this opportunity of this standard coming to
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Great question. Yeah. So my theory of change that guides everything that I do is we have the energy globally. Just think now, just imagine all the people worldwide who are going, oh my God, there's something wrong and I want to do something about it, right? Everywhere. We have that energy. And every day someone's waking up feeling this. We have the solutions. We know, really. We have the ability to make the right decisions. But what we don't have is the confidence as individuals to embody a new future and to bring others with us. That's where the rubber hits the road. That is the ultimate act, is to be a leader, to embody a new future and bring others with you. You cannot have that confidence without two things: unity and clarity. Unity and clarity. And those are interconnected. So you will not have the confidence to embody a new future unless you are not alone, right? No one. We're humans, right? We never do it if we think we're the absolutely only one. We need to know, and the bigger the norm is, the bigger the sense that, yeah, I'm doing this on behalf of everyone, we all feel like this, the stronger and the bigger the confidence. But you can't unify around nothing, right? So you need to unify around a very clear sense of what you're trying to achieve within what parameters. That's the ultimate governance frame. Then you can ask conversations about complexity of strategy and keeping that emergent and open and taking all the bureaucracy away. So that's what's lacking, and that's where standards come in, because they provide the clarity and the unity. They don't just clarify what it is that we want to achieve, but the process, and ISO particularly, is just the world's best, most highly refined consensus building process. That's all it is. It's a process for the world to come together to agree on everything, anything. There are 171 countries. Just imagine that for a moment. That's amazing. 171 countries have national member bodies, standard building bodies, that are arm's length from the government, or in various degrees of arm's lengthness. That is a massive infrastructure that we have there to use to try to build unity and a norm around any topic. My God, we should be using it. So this is where my journey with ISO is. I'm like, that is the best facility for overcoming this sense of shared direction and pooling our energy and making the future come about. And so it is incredibly exciting that after, as I worked on the social value standard, but this journey, the governance standard, the national purpose-driven standard, and now the remit, the mandate to go off and create the ISO in purpose. I can imagine a lot of people just think, oh, what's that? It's just a standard. For me, that is an accountability frame, it's a shared language, but more importantly, it's a 2-year process where we can, if we want to, go around to all 171 countries and more and say, hey guys, there's a global conversation going on here about how we make governance decisions aligned with a sustainable future. Come and join the conversation, co-own this. Then that's how we make change.
Yeah, that's very powerful. I know we're out of time, so I have to ask one last question. You're a Brit, you're living in France. Let's talk about Canada for a moment. What do you see when you look at Canada, our resource-intensive economy? We are, as you know, buffeted, influenced by the energies south of the border, the anti-ESG backlash, the polarization. At the same time, we're lagging Europe in sustainability reporting, net zero strategies implementation. Is there a unique role for Canada here? Is there something that we can contribute that you would like the audience to be aware of from your vantage point?
Yeah, absolutely. I genuinely and would autonomously say that Canada, you bridge 2 worlds, 3 worlds, really. You bridge the Commonwealth and the old world and Europe. You bridge the new world, the North American world and the USA, and the indigenous cultures. So you embody all those things, and I can't think of another country that does that. So, you know, Australia's over there, you know, you're here. Geographically, you're also right in the heart of all of that. So I would say just merely on that basis, that means that you can be a translator across those different divides and show each of those constituents how it's done. But I would also say that there's clearly something very special already happening in Canada. The reason that I was here 18 months ago also doing something with the Purpose Economy project, talking to the really vibrant community, sort of leading edge hub that you have here, that's working increasingly at a Canadian-wide level to take advantage of some of that momentum with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and really drive it forward. Now, I do stuff globally, but there's no other country where I could turn around and say, there is a coordinated effort and it's happening over there. But I can say, there is a massive coordinated effort happening in Canada, and Vancouver's where the heart of it is. That's my perspective. I'm sure there's a lot more happening that I don't know about, and probably that the Purpose Economy doesn't know about. But the point is, if I'm just a sample, you know, a marker in the system, I'd say you've got something very special here, and the potential to wield that. But I would say, yes, focus on home, focus on getting this, you know, really, you know, grounded in your practice, but do it at the very same time as using your global influence to create system change, because we don't have enough time not to do that. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in Canada.
I think that's a good note to end. Thank you so much, Victoria.